who is who. Our first panelist, Eric Ozals, is that right?
Close enough.
Okay. He is here representing two organizations, the Inland Empire Atheist and Agnostic Community, the IEAA, and the Free Thinkers Around Redlands, the FAR, F-A-R community. And he has been an active member of these communities for about a year. Is that
Give or
correct?
take.
Yeah, give or take. So let's all welcome Eric. Next, David Miller. He has been practicing Buddhism all his life. He is a member of the Soka Gakkai Buddhist community located in Riverside. And in case you didn't know, the national headquarters for SG Buddhism is in Santa Monica, California. So he's associated with that tradition. Let's all welcome David. Steve Sarimbi has been a Roman Catholic since his baptism 10 days after he was born. That's right. He is currently an ordained deacon and pastoral coordinator for Holy Name of Jesus Catholic Community of Redlands. Let's welcome Deacon Sarimbi. And then finally, Ian Diorio has been practicing Christianity since his conversion at the age of 21. Before this, he was raised in a secular home. He currently serves as the lead pastor at Yucaipa Christian Church. Let's welcome Ian. Okay, and I personally wanted to extend my gratitude for all you panelists for coming. Thank you so much for making this happen. This is going to be a lot of fun. Maybe more fun for me than anyone else. I can barely contain myself. I'm like a kid in a candy shell. Let's do this. All right, so as I said, I'm going to direct these first four questions are directed at specific panelists. If you'd like to ask a follow-up question, please do so, okay? So, Mr. Miller, this question is for you first. If we are all the reincarnation of other human beings, as Buddhists seem to believe, then why does the population keep expanding? Where do these new human beings come from? It's one of our student questions. So,
okay. And just to start, just introduce kind of where my particular sect of Buddhism comes from. It's Nichiren Daishonin Buddhism, which is based from Japan. Nichiren Daishonin was a 13th century monk in Japan that read all the different sutras from Buddha and found that the Lotus Sutra was kind of the most profound of those sutras. And so that's where our foundation of our practice is, the Lotus Sutra from Buddha, and then also the writings of Nichiren Daishonin in Japan in the 13th century. So within that context, as far as the idea is that there is no fixed self that lives as an unchanging entity. So rather than reincarnation as kind of a person going from body to body, it's more just the transfer of a continuity of life. And so the karma or the actions that that person has taken in life transfers from one life to the next, but the very specifics of that person don't necessarily transfer. And so how does that actually look like? One example given is, this is from our current president of the organization, Daisaku Ikeda, and he says, "I find it helpful to compare the cycles of life and death to the daily rhythms of waking and sleeping. Just as we look forward to the rest sleep brings after the efforts and exertions of the day, death can be seen as a welcome period of rest and re-energizing in preparation for a new round of active life. And just as we enjoy the best sleep after a day in which we have done our very best, a calm and easy death can only follow a life lived to the fullest without any regrets." And so another example is kind of like waves on the ocean. And so as a wave rises and goes back down into the ocean, that it isn't necessarily that the wave disappears or the droplets that made the wave itself disappear into the ocean, but it just goes back, and then at a later time, given the correct cause, the correct circumstances, that wave re-emerges. And so that's kind of how life is. And so fundamental, it's based on, karma. And so the actions that the person has created through their lifetime is what transfers from one lifetime to the next. And so that's kind of, a short version of it. And then also, too, that we believe there's a concept called the ninth consciousness, nine consciousness. And basically, it's the first 6 are our senses and how we combine the senses to understand our world around us. And then also by our karma and actions that we create is the 7th and 8th consciousness, which allows that transfer to happen once we pass away. And so it isn't necessarily a soul or a specific person that transfers from one body to the next. It's those karmic actions that transfer.
Very good. Yeah, thank you for providing the context to your organizations at the beginning of that answer. That was helpful. All right, the next question. See any hands here? No? Okay, so the next question is for Deacon Cervantez. Why do Catholics pray to or through Mary when Jesus encourages us to come directly to him because he has all the authority?
Thank you. I was just sitting here thinking as you were talking that, and I've always felt this, that religions are so much interrelated and we have so many concepts that really are almost universal. You know, when you talked about the concept of death in Buddhism, I was thinking of purgatory in Catholicism. It's like there's almost a relationship there. In terms of Mary, how many of you have personally or heard a family member, perhaps the older generation maybe for some of you, ask somebody to pray for them or asked to be prayed for? Is that something you're familiar with in our regular lives, you know, our daily lives? Well, really, that's what this Mary question is about, okay? We don't pray to Mary as Catholics. Rather, we ask Mary to pray for us, just as your grandmother might ask you to pray for her. Because really, we believe that Mary and all the saints are with God. All of our desire in life is to be with God for eternity. And since they are there with God, we believe kind of that they're closer to God than we are. And so we may decide to ask Saints Mary to pray for us directly, even though we also pray directly. It's sort of like a leg up maybe, you know? And so really we don't pray to Mary. We don't believe Mary is a deity. We believe she's the mother of God, the mother of Christ. And in that sense, we honor her because she said yes. Now, having an illegitimate child in this day is very different than it was in Israel 2,000 years ago, right? I mean, if you were found pregnant and not married, you were stoned to death, okay? And yet, she said voluntarily, yes, I will be the mother of the Son of God. And for that we honor her, because without that, Jesus may never have arguably become human, incarnate, right, enfleshed. I think that pretty much answers the question.
Good.
Okay, so the Bible does teach about intercessory and supplication prayer amongst the body of believers.
Right.
Where specifically in the Bible is the principle of having one of the saints or Mary interceding for the body of Christ?
It's kind of sprinkled throughout, but the one that first comes to my mind in the letter to the Hebrews, there's a line in there about a vast cloud of witnesses. And we look at those, we interpret those witnesses to be the saints, the people who have gone before us, either saints that we say are quote-unquote canonized, they're canonized through the church, or anyone who has died and gone to God. You know, St. Paul called the people in his churches saints, to the saints at Ephesus, for example. Because once you have accepted God, you have accepted Christ, you're in essence on your way, right? You're going to be a saint. And so it's in that sense that we believe that the saints are with God, and we want to be with them, and in a sense we're kind of like proto-saints, because we do believe, we have faith, and we will be there with them. We just have to live out our human life here as faithful Christians, right?
Another question over here. Yeah.
I know this is slightly off topic, but you mentioned purgatory. What's your definition of
Throughout history, purgatory has been considered a geographic place, right? When we die, we go to this plateau or wherever in life. But really, we've come to understand that purgatory is really just a state, okay? It's not a place that we go. It's a state of being in that, in a state of being kind of like in Buddhism, where we arguably reflect on our life, reflect how we lived, and come to a kind of a greater holiness in essence, so that we are preparing ourselves to go on to be with God in everlasting life.
All right. Thank you. Next question, Mr. Ozols. Why do atheists think there is no God?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the organizers and the college and the students, my groups, friends and family. Thank you guys for joining and having me and us. That's very appreciated. As far as the question is concerned, there's a couple of moving parts here that I want to draw attention to. And it's always a really bad idea that when someone asks you a formal question to not answer the question directly as asked. If you're ever getting interviewed and your interviewer asks you a question, don't change the question. Answer exactly what they ask you, okay? So I'm going to do that, but then I'm going to tell you a little bit of caveats I have to as well. So there's a couple moving parts in this question that I got as I received it. A minor objection and a little bit more major objection. The minor objection was slightly presuppositional, and my assumption is it was perfectly innocuous. When I received the question via email a few days ago, the last word of the question was God. Why do atheists believe there is no God, or think there is no God? That word was capitalized, G-O-D. And something that goes along with this, people don't realize, is in Western culture, when you capitalize the word God, you are making this is a really lame term, but you're making a small microaggression. You're kind of asserting that we are talking about the one Abrahamic supernatural deity that does exist, and you can either choose to fall in line with the rest of us, or you can choose to be an outcast. So that's one small minor issue. And my assumption is it's very likely that was just an autocorrect issue. I don't think you were trying to make a microaggression against me. Whenever you type that out on a keyboard in the Western Hemisphere, you're going to get the word God with capitalized. But if it's not the beginning of the sentence and it's somewhere else in the middle, you are making an assertion, okay? Just to be aware. The second issue is, the question is asked was, why do most atheists think there is no God? And this question, believe it or not, is actually directed at a very, very small segment of what most people consider themselves to be, who call themselves atheists or accept the label of atheist if they don't want to take the label, or any other secular denomination of that sort. And there's a couple moving parts to understand here. There's implicit and explicit atheists. There's different ways to come at this problem. And when it's implied, for example, you'll hear people say something very inflammatory online all the time, and I'm not a big fan of it, but it does actually drive home a point. You'll hear, all babies are born atheists. Well, this would be the implicit version, right? It is implied that baby doesn't have any God beliefs, right? He hasn't been given the opportunity to believe, she hasn't been given the opportunity to believe, so it is implied that they don't have any God beliefs. This is a lack of a God belief, okay? This is the implicit version. This is my own subjective opinion. I think, if I had to guess, somebody put a gun on my head, you must say, what percentage of people are atheists in this? I'd say about 95% of people consider themselves purely implicit, okay? You don't have a God belief. That's a lack of God belief. If you have a positive belief that there is no God, you'd be the explicit version, okay? So as far as the implicit version goes, they would simply say the null hypothesis, which is a scientific term that means until you provide me with credible evidence to accept your claim as accurate, I have no reason to. So demonstrate me credible evidence, and I'm on your team. As far as the explicit atheist goes, they would say something more along the lines of, it has been presented to me numerous times over and over again, and credible evidence is not forthcoming. Therefore, I believe positively, explicitly, this claim is false. Fair enough?
Yeah, follow-up question.
What would you take to be credible evidence?
My favorite way to answer this question is, I would need, I don't know, I'm just going to assume for sake of argument you're a theist of some kind, I don't know. My assumption would be that whatever evidence you would need to believe the claims of, say, pantheism or panentheism, say a Hindu, okay? If a Hindu came to you and said, oh, just so you know, Lord Brahma vomited up on his chest, and that Lord on his chest happened to be named Vishnu, and he can represent himself in many different avatars, and someday Lord Shiva is going to come destroy the universe, you would say, present me with credible evidence and I'll accept your claim. So whatever you would need to believe their claim, I would need to believe your claim, presuppositionally, if you're a theist. Fair enough?
Okay, thank you. Next question is for Pastor Diorio. Why do you believe, and presumably Christians, believe Jesus rose from the dead?
Well, I want to say it's good to be with you as well. And one of the things I hope that you get from this is we live in a world full of vitriol and misunderstanding. And I hope you see a lot of love and respect, even though we do differ and there's different perspectives, that we would honor civility in conversation, even if we think we're wrong, and that's okay. I love college students. You know, when college students want to know about Christianity, they usually want to know about sex, the end times, and will there be sex in the end times? And so I'm grateful to not talk about any three of those things. I was raised an atheist agnostic. I don't believe in God because I believe in God generically. I believe in God because of Jesus Christ and the revelation he brings. The question was, why do I believe in the resurrection of Jesus? I believe in it for both existential and historical reasons, biblical as well. For historical reasons, I think it's very unique to understand the person of Jesus of Nazareth. He was a historical person. Even secular people like Bart Ehrman, who's an agnostic atheist, would affirm the historical Jesus, and there's basic primary facts about Jesus. He was crucified under a man named Pontius Pilate, a historic figure under the Roman proconsul. We know that is a historic fact. Basic people, even people atheist agnostic, would agree with that historically. We know that he was buried in a tomb. We also know the earliest claims of Christianity was that that tomb was empty on Sunday morning because Jesus was raised from the dead. And the explosion of the early church within the first centuries was the very expression that this Jesus was raised from the dead. So, for instance, if Jesus was in the tomb and followers of his were saying that he was raised from the dead, the easiest way to stop the evolving revolutionary movement of Christianity would to bring out his corpse, hang him in the middle of the city, let people see his dead body. That never happened. In fact, the earliest criticism of the opponents of Christianity was that the body was stolen, which testifies to the fact that there was an empty tomb. I believe in the resurrection because of the testimony of the early disciples, which they were, first of all, not believers. What's fascinating about the gospel accounts, they do not read like mythology. They read like accounts that tell truths about their founders. For instance, Peter, one of the founders of the Catholic Church, he was a denier. He denied Jesus. James, the brother of Jesus, did not believe during Jesus' lifetime, and yet he was transformed by the resurrection. And these men, and women, by the way, went around preaching the resurrection of Jesus, not for financial benefit, for social and cultural advancement, not for fame and wealth. Many did for the very consequence of their lives, crucified and died for this belief. I believe in the resurrection because the earliest testimony of the resurrection of Jesus was given by women. Now, if you were trying to make up a myth in the ancient world, which was a patriarchal society, you would not claim that the earliest testimony of this event was women, because women's testimony was not held accountable in both Roman jurisprudence and Jewish jurisprudence. Women weren't able to testify. A guy could steal from a woman would be able to testify in court that he stole. And yet the church stuck with this idea that it was the women who testified and saw the tomb empty. I believe in Jesus' resurrection because of the martyrs of the early church. I believe in the resurrection of Jesus because of the explosion of Christianity in the world. And lastly, because of the immediate experience of Jesus now, which I believe you can have if you put your faith in him.
Follow-up questions? Oh.
I write young adult fiction novels, and I have, wherever I've traveled, I have used real people, real places, real cities, and incorporated it into my story.
Yep.
How is there 100% accuracy in knowing that, because one character in the Bible was real, how does that mean that they're real in the story that they're just incorporated?
Well, it's really interesting. In the gospel accounts, they really do not read like ancient mythology. Part of my work in my graduate studies was in classics. And a writer like C.S. Lewis, who was an expert of ancient mythology and fiction, said these books don't read like that. For instance, in the Gospel of Mark, there's names of people. Like, for instance, it says, the father of Rufus and Alexander, one of the quotes in that story. Rufus and Alexander don't even come into the story in the Gospel of Mark. They're not even in the narrative at all. Why would they put them there? Richard Bauckham, professor of ancient Christianity and ancient classics at St. Andrews University, argues in his book that those are like footnotes. That what's taking place in the writing of the Gospels is the interjection of people who were living at the time, names such as Rufus and Alexander, or in the Gospel of Luke, there's names in the Gospel account. Why would those names be put in there? Because it's a way for the people who are reading those to actually figure out if they're historically there. The Gospel of Luke does not start off, forlore ago in ancient history, it says, I've carefully investigated what has happened. In fact, it's the most high esteemed Greek language in the New Testament. It's ancient Greek used in the way Plato or Aristotle, classical Greek, would be used. And it is implicit of somebody doing investigatory, journalistic perspective on this event. So I think the Gospels are replete with history. Doesn't mean that there's not parables or stories. That's the problem. When we read these texts, we really have to ask deeper questions than, are they, kind of thin presentations. For instance, in the Gospels, there's parable, and there's poetry, and there's history. And so we need to hermeneutically read the sections by themselves. But I think the overall implication of these gospel events and the writings of Paul, that's another evidence of the resurrection. Paul was transformed. Assume the historicity of these events.
It was written so many years later after the event took place. How is the accuracy? How do you know the accuracy is true?
Well, I don't want to occupy too much time. I'm happy to engage. So I'll give you two answers. I would say, one, we have more manuscripts of the Greek New Testament than any other document in the history of the world. So, for instance, Homer's Odyssey or the Iliad, we have maybe 80, 100 documents. Just of the New Testament Gospels, we have in the tens of thousands, 8,000s. Real interesting thing that happened just recently, we found a papyrus fragment of the Gospel of Mark on a papier-mâché Egyptian doll that goes back possibly to the 30s to 50s. Jesus was crucified, died in 33. The earliest proclamation of the gospel happened in an oral culture. You got to remember, paper is expensive back then. Jews were oral history. I can go into the depths of Jewish understanding of oral history. For instance, even rabbis or Orthodox can have the whole Pentateuch memorized. So I think we're in a different culture there, but I do believe that what they're arguing is for historic. And I think, by the way, archaeology and the testimony of ancient manuscripts is actually showing that it's much earlier than people have assumed.
Okay, great. So this next question, the next set of questions are going to be addressed to all the panelists.
Sure.
So, first question for all the panelists. What, if anything, awaits the human soul after death? Let's just start here, Deacon Cervantez, and we'll go across the panel.
Well, we believe that all human beings are given the gift of faith. And with free will, you do with that faith what in your life you do with it, right? You can throw it away. In the gospel, there is a parable about the sower, and it applies to a few things, including the Word of God, but also it can apply to faith. And you can, you can throw your seeds on a path, and it'll be trampled. Figuratively speaking, you can let your seeds go in thorns, and it'll be choked out, or it can go on rock and not be nurtured and wither away and die. But if we keep that faith in our life and we live like the way Jesus called us to be disciples, then our souls will be united with our bodies, that maybe not these physical bodies, but they may be a resurrected body like Jesus' body, and go to heaven, go to the Father, and be there for eternity. I guess that's the simple answer.
All right, thank you.
Do you want us all to answer this? Or
Yes.
Okay. Do you want us to go down the line?
Yeah, we'll just go down the panel line. Mr. Miller?
Talked about this a little bit already, but a different aspect that usually when karma comes up in context, usually it's negative. That it's just my karma to be poor, or not accomplish things, or these types of things happen to me. But really, it's not a negative or a positive thing. It's just simply an accumulation of actions and reactions based on what we've done in our lifetime and what other people around us have done in their lifetimes, and that compounding effect. And one of the greatest parts about our particular practice is that we don't feel that you are tied to your karma, that it isn't based on like the Indian caste system or Hinduism, where you have to repeat lifetime after lifetime and eventually hopefully change whatever karma you have. That within this lifetime you can change your karma. And so even if you have health problems, you have financial misfortune, whatever it is, that you can always transform that to become something that's positive and something that not only you can create a better life for yourself, but help others do the same. And so when we're making those positive actions within our life, we're helping change that karma so that in the future, that maybe we're not reborn with those types of problems or in a better situation. And so the idea is that it's constant accumulation of those actions to help us now and also into the future.
Okay. Good. You got green for me? Okay. The question's an interesting one. I would say this specifically. I think Christianity classically believes that we will experience a resurrection as Jesus experienced for those of us who have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And most of us who were raised in Christianity, I wasn't, you kind of hear that you die and you go to heaven, and it's kind of that's kind of the point. That's actually not biblical Christianity. The vision of biblical Christianity is of a new heaven and a new earth, that God is going to take this fallen, broken world and recreate it. And so the question is, where do we go? What happens to us after we die? Well, that question assumes a few things. One, it assumes that we're made of two parts, right? There's a physical part, and there would be maybe a spiritual part, or if you're maybe your consciousness or whatever. I am a substance dualist. I do believe that you're not just your physical body, that consciousness does not exist in your brain, but it relates to your brain. So I believe when you die, there will be a part of you that exists. Now, I believe we live in a physical universe, but I also believe we live in a spiritual universe. And just as there's physical laws like gravity, if I drop that, it's going to fall, there's spiritual laws. And spiritual laws are both ethical, moral, and relational. What that means is, if I violate my relationship with God, as we've heard here with my free will, meaning I don't want to be in relationship with God, God is a God of love, so he's not going to get rid of me. He has to do something with me. And classically, the Christian understanding of that is, you're not going to like this word, I know, hell, right? But hell is not this place of fire and brimstone. It's actually a place of separation for people who say, I don't want to be in relationship with God. And God is a God of love. So instead of hurting the people who don't want to be with him, the only thing he can do is separate. Just as if you had a person who said, I don't want to be with you. I don't want to submit to your rules. I don't want to live in relationship with you. If they're your child, you might go, well, you can't live in my house. Because for you to live in my house, there's certain ethical standards. So I believe there's a place that separation with God after death, but I also believe there's a place of union with God after death, and classically that would be called heaven. And heaven is a place of bliss and paradise, and it's a relationship with God that gets you there. The question is, where do we go? I think it's more like heaven's going to come here versus we go to heaven, and so we await the renewal of all things. And Jesus was a foretaste or a first glimpse of what that future world will look like. And that's why I believe in the resurrection of Jesus. Okay,
I would assume that you would expect my answer to be very brief, but if I have a captive audience, I'm not one to let them go. I actually was going to be relatively brief, but my friend Ian, if you're familiar with basketball metaphors, he just gave me an alley-oop. I'm going to take the ball and slam dunk it after I answer the question briefly first, okay? The question was, what awaits the human soul after death? Things which don't exist can't go places. When you go to Knott's Berry Farms, when you go to Six Flags, you only pay for admission for all the people you have with you. You don't pay for yourself and someone else that's not there with you, right? Right? Okay, so if you don't have something with you, you can't pay admission for it. If you don't have anything else with you inside of your material that you're composed of, it can't go anywhere after you die. So the fun limerick atheists, agnostics like to say is, we believe in, I personally don't like the word believe, but they'll say, we believe in death after life. Death, as defined, is a cessation of life, okay? Fair enough. So as far as the ball was concerned, you said consciousness relates to the body, substance dualism, but I don't want to misquote you. Is that fair?
100%.
Okay, consciousness relates to the body. It's not a function of the body.
It's an interrelationship. Music is not in a piano, it's in the piano player, but the music that's in the mind of the piano player is expressed through the piano.
Okay.
There's an interrelationship.
Fair enough. Okay, so 2 points on that I want to make. One, real quick, and I'm respective of the time, is we have soldiers coming back from overseas and they have traumatic brain injuries, okay? And when their brain is injured, a doctor can look at their brain while they're in a coma and tell you exactly what functions they're going to lose. If they lose portions of their brain that deal specifically with language, we can map the brain and tell you exactly what part of the brain is going to do the part of you that speaks English, right? If they lose that part of the brain, they may wake up from their coma and you be able to use every other part of their body, but they'll forget how to speak English. It's the strangest thing you've seen in your entire life. So what I'm being asked to accept as legitimate is that when the entire brain dies, somehow, some other way, there's going to be all of you able to speak English and walk and recognize your pet from 3rd grade, okay? I'm going to need to see credible evidence for that claim before I accept it as legitimate. Fair enough?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Can I respond?
There's plenty of time.
I mean, say you have
I'd like to hear him respond to that.
Yeah,
Okay, put your hand up.
say you have a piano, right? And I had the world expert of piano tuners. And before that piano tuner came over, I clipped the chords. Is that the technical word for piano? I'm not a piano player. Whatever they use. Just to strings, right? I clipped. That piano player can go, it will not be able to play these chords because the strings have been clipped. That is no way in saying that music is found in the piano. And because there's a portion of the piano that has been clipped and made inept to play that part of music, that music is now somehow diminished because that piano has a diminishment. The brain, for me, is a tool of the soul. I believe not only Christians argue that. An atheist scholar, Thomas Nagel at New York University, has argued in his book, God and Cosmos, that the Darwinian notion of materialism is almost completely wrong. He argues as an atheist perspective that the idea that this 8-pound chunk of gray matter produces things like love and emotion and feeling and longing and intuition is absolutely, I think, bunko. I believe that there's an interrelationship between matter and soul, but I do not believe that soul is dependent upon matter or found completely in matter. It is an instrument of the soul that the brain expresses. So if you hit the brain, you will diminish the instrument, the piano player's ability to play that music through the brain, but that's no way to say that the music's found in the brain itself.
The problem is where does music exist? It exists. It exists in your mind.
Yeah.
What is your mind? Your mind is the program that your brain is running. Your brain is the hardware, and your mind is the program that it is running. If I get up right now and I start singing a Beastie Boys song that many of you recognize, that will instantly trigger a part of your brain that I could have mapped before it happened. And you go, oh, I recognize that. That's, whatever Alive or whatever Beastie Boys song, right?
I love that song.
You'll immediately recognize that. That is current. That is occurring in the mind. What is the medium that we get music from? The same medium that you're getting my voice from right now. The material of my vocal cords is disturbing the material of the air around you, which is vibrating in waves and entering into your inner ear. Your inner ear is translating that and telling your brain what you're hearing right now. If I was singing a song, it'd be the same way. My voice and music exist in the same place. They require material to exist, but they are concepts. Concepts do not exist apart from minds. If they do, please, by all means, demonstrate to me a concept existing independent of a mind.
I'll happily do that. Mathematical truths. Do mathematical truths exist only in consciousness? If they are, then our consciousness is the creator of mathematical truths, which makes science completely impossible because there are certain assumptions about scientific and mathematical truth that you need to make and assume before you even begin science. So I think there's things like truth, goodness, mathematics, beauty, consciousness. I mean, there's so many things that you can't prove. And lastly, because I don't want to take up too much time, I would definitely argue that mind and brain are two different things. And I don't think you have to be Christian to argue that. There's plenty of secular philosophers who would make that argument that there is a distinctive difference between mind as an event related to brain and brain itself.
Show me the mind functioning without the brain, first of all. Second of all, you refer to Platonic realism.
Yes.
You said mathematical concepts. Would you agree 2 + 2 = 4?
Yes, I would.
This is a real...
I don't think it exists in the brain, though.
Oh, you don't think it exists in the brain?
No, I think it's a relation. I think the brain
So,
attunes to the relation.
Are you saying it exists in material?
I think it lives in a metaphysical reality. I think it's a metaphysical truth.
Well, I mean, you can make up any metaphysics you want. I mean, demonstrate to me the existence of a number. Demonstrate to me the existence of a symbol for addition or subtraction.
Why?
I'm gonna call it there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Fascinating question. I mean, we could go down this. And
This is our lunch break discussion.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah, and for Brianna's sake.
Yeah.
But I wanted to see if Steve, David, did you want to add on to any of the conversation they were having?
And by the way, there's a lot of love too. This is
there's no animosity.
There's no animosity. Where this is theoretical. I hope you guys can model the love in theoretical.
It's about finding the most correct answer.
Right. That's right.
If you didn't, we'll move on. But I just wanted to give you an opportunity.
Really what it comes down to is either you have faith or you don't. Are you able in your life to make that leap of faith? And secondly, really we think of science way ahead of religion in a sense, but really science is only beginning catching up with faith, okay, with what we believe. Because more and more scientists, there are books you can go read, arguments between one particular Jesuit priest and, Stephen Hawking, where really Hawking didn't prove that God does not exist. As a matter of fact, really, it's unlikely that God doesn't exist. So really, it comes down to faith, it comes down to belief, it comes down to making that leap, okay? We don't know everything. We're human, okay? There are things beyond us. Our minds see about a quarter of reality, right? God sees 360 degrees. And we're never going to see nor understand it all. And if we expect that we have to understand scientifically everything, it's not going to happen. In the next life, we can ask what it's all about. And then maybe we'll get the full, complete answer. So we have faith or we don't.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of similar to that same sentiment that there's, definitely, the faith aspect and then also kind of the, logical reasoning aspect. And with Buddhism, that it's always, it's not one or the other, it's both. And really, both parts support each other. And so, with our practice that we have documentary proof, which is basically the written, context from Shakyamuni Buddha, and then also Nichiren Daishonin. And then we also have, our personal experiences, which is experiential proof. And so when we use our faith to overcome whatever obstacles we may have in our life, whatever challenges we have, then that's a proof to us that the practice works. And so we can compare our lives before, especially for people who weren't born into the practice, that if something were their life before the practice and then their life after, they can see some profound changes in their life. And whether that's overcoming cancer, overcoming financial difficulties, all those things compound on itself to prove that, okay, this is a correct path. Maybe not the only path, but at least a path that's working well for me and is able to help me accomplish my goals in life. And so it's the combination of those two parts and really focusing on what's the best way to live my life currently, and what's the best way to help others be able to live their lives in the best way possible as well. That's kind of our fundamental decisions on how we want to live and how we make those actions in our lives.
Thank you. All right, next question for all the panelists. This is just getting better and better, Fantastic. Does your tradition or system of belief inform your ethics? And what do each of you consider to be the guiding moral principles in your life? And just share, what is the source, basically, of your ethical values and principles? And do you have any guiding ethical principles?
There have been theologians for, hundreds and hundreds of years that have dealt with the issue of morality and ethics. But really, if you want to just take an acorn, the two greatest commandments Jesus said were to love God with all our heart, souls, strength, and mind, and our neighbor as ourself. So those 4 little words, or 5 little words, and our neighbor as ourself, that's really ethics, morality in a nutshell. Yeah, it's become real complicated now. We're talking about assisted suicide and abortion and all of these issues that we have in our very complicated world. But ultimately the question is, are we loving our neighbor? And who is our neighbor? Everyone is our neighbor, as we learned from the parable. So ultimately, yes, our faith does inform our conscience. It informs our morality. It forms how we live our everyday life. It's all about unconditional love for the people around us. The people here in this classroom, the people in Syria, the people in Russia, everyone. And that's our challenge, to live as disciples.
So Buddhism, the inception of Buddhism was really that, Shakyamuni was a prince in India about 2,500 years ago and saw, in the palace, he had all types of riches and servants and everything like that. But he would look outside the palace walls and he would see, birth, death, aging, and sickness. And those are things that he didn't personally experience within the palace walls. And so ultimately his path began because of wondering what is suffering and how can we overcome suffering. And so that's the origination of it. And so in order to understand what suffering was, that he gave up his all his riches, his life, to become basically homeless and beg for alms to be able to feed himself, and eventually became enlightened and started preaching about Buddhism, his philosophy. And so ultimately that's kind of what the heart of Buddhism is, just how do we eliminate the suffering, what causes our suffering, and how are we able to overcome that. And there's a lot of different things that cause those things. There's a lot of different events in our lives that can make us either really happy, really sad, whatnot. But ultimately it's about how to answer that question. And within practice, we have a concept called the 10 worlds. And basically, just the lowest world is hell, and the highest world is Buddhahood. And the main difference between the two is that hell, that it's actually ultimate slavery to your environment. And so that it's just based on whatever's happening around you is how you feel. If things are good, things are good. If things are bad, things are bad. And you have no freedom whatsoever. Whereas Buddhahood, the other side of it, is absolute freedom. That regardless of what is happening in your life, whether you're sick, you're poor, family troubles, that no matter what, you have this strength of self that and have absolute hope in your future and can overcome any obstacle. And so really it's not necessarily the suffering that brings us down to the hell, it's how we react to it. Are we going to make positive changes to increase our lives? Are we going to make positive changes to those outside of ourselves? Or are we going to be taken down by whatever that particular thing is? And so making sure that we're not slaves to our environment, but rather active participants and create our own environment is really how we achieve that enlightenment or Buddhahood. And it's not a place that you get to. You're always going to bounce back and forth between all the different worlds. And within those worlds, they possess the worlds themselves. So even if you have this deep suffering that you're going through hell, you can still create positive actions and help other people. Or if you feel anger, you can feel anger towards injustice and use that anger to fuel you to be able to make a positive change in your environment. And so that's kind of the interactions there.
Do I have a green card? I just want to make sure I'm not violating the rules. First thing I want to say actually has nothing to do with where I get my morality from, is that I don't think you have to be religious to be moral. I don't think you have to be a Christian to be moral. I think there's been a lot of atrocities with the notion of a Christian moral majority. I think I'm not part of that in any way. I think all that's horrible. You can be moral without a belief in God. I would definitely agree with that. The second question I would say is asked, well, why would there be such a thing as morality among a highly evolved group of Homo sapiens that we would claim that is objective, meaning truly objective, that the difference between caring for a little girl, raising her as your daughter, and raping her and killing her for fun, there's a moral difference there, and I would say there's an objective moral difference there. And meaning it's not, if one culture in the world never heard about it's bad to rape and kill little girls, they think that's part of their faith, and it makes a prosperous society, I think they're wrong. They're as wrong as 2 + 2 = 5 is wrong. So I think the first thing I would say is we have to acknowledge that there is morality, there's moral truth in the world. The second thing I would say is we know that. We have a consciousness. We have conscious views of the world, and I believe, because I'm a Christian, that God has written his law on our hearts. Not clearly, but we know the difference intuitively, right and wrong, and we can actually deform and debase that internal understanding of right and wrong by working consciously against it. First time you steal, it must be really scary. The 10th time you steal, it doesn't hurt that much, right? So I think we have a moral truth and that is internal in us. And I think we should be on a journey, all of us, to find out what that objective moral truth is. Because if you lose it, and you'll only make ethical decisions based on feeling. And that's where we live. Notice there's no truth button on Facebook. There's only a like button. Because we make every ethical decision. Do I like it or do I not? Do I feel good about it or not? Your feelings are a horrible leader in your life. I'm going to just let you know that. You should not try to base your life on feelings. You should base them on truth. Amen, right? Why? I didn't know we were going to get a revival going. What are my ethical beliefs? For me, it all comes down to actually subjective truth, and because I believe truth became a subject in the person of Jesus Christ. And Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And I believe it's by looking at the model and the life of Jesus that we discover what truth is. Jesus, as we've heard, summarized his, love God, love your neighbor. But also Jesus was the first to argue for a pacifistic ethic, a nonviolent ethic. Gandhi looked at Jesus' ethic and said, "Oh, I like your Jesus, I don't like your Christians because they don't follow the ethic of your teacher." And I think for me, we as Christians, if you're in the room, need to get back to following Jesus, not the historical understandings and renditions of what it means to follow Jesus. And I believe ultimately it comes down to an ethic of love, that every one of us in this room have a divine oughtness over our life. We feel that we ought to do something. Where does that come from? I don't see lions feeling they ought to love a gazelle. There's a moral oughtness in our lives that's unique from any other species that we see in the natural world. That's very true. And I believe it's that moral oughtness that comes from God.
The question asked was, does your tradition or system of beliefs inform your ethics? I would object to my having a system of beliefs. The word belief means to accept as true. My acceptance of something being accurate or inaccurate is not related to it actually being accurate or not. I would prefer to say my ideas or my thoughts. If I don't know something, I say I think, I guess, I hope. I don't say I believe, because my acceptance is unrelated. So leave it out of the equation. Plus, we get, like you said, we get truth from definitions. We don't get description from definitions. Definitions are not descriptions, okay? So absolutely, the answer to the question is absolutely. The way I look at the world, my methods of getting accurate information, which I find to be the most reliable. If you have a better method, please bring it to me. I'm doing the best I can to get the most accurate answer. Bronze Age claims. I'm trying to do the best I can to get the best, most accurate information I can at all times, and let that inform my ethical decisions. So I have better methods than some, and I prefer to stick with the ones that have been reliable to me in the past. I don't see how you can remove, or how you can separate, partition the idea of what you believe and your ethics, how you act, how you interact with the world around you. I don't have an afterlife to believe in. If the claims of afterlife of your fellow theists on this planet are wrong, if they are demonstrably wrong, okay, they are just mistaken, then they don't have an afterlife to believe in either. They think they have an afterlife to believe in. And they think that there is a governor, a supernatural divine governor, that's governing their action, commanding them to do good, commanding them to do evil if they're evil individuals. I don't have that. So I have to do good because I think it's good, because I can empathize. I have sympathetic rationale. And I can see a woman on the side of the road who's got a flat tire, and I pull over and say, I don't want my wife to have a flat tire on the side of the road, and no one pull over and help her out. So I pull over and help her out, because I think doing good for goodness sake is good, not because I'm being governed or because I'm being told to. If you're doing good in the world because you think you're going to get a present or a reward, or because you think you might be punished if you don't, you're doing it for disingenuous reasons. It's not altruism, okay? It's coercion, all right? And the second question you wanted to ask was about ethics. I would like to think of myself, and if you would consider me this way, I would consider it a great compliment. I think of myself as someone who will take whatever steps are practically possible to maximize the amount of good in conscious creatures, persons are not just people, that they can experience, and to minimize unnecessary harm. My lack of belief, or my positive belief that someone else's supernatural claims are false or wrong, okay, does not inform my decisions. My lack of thinking, my thinking you are wrong, or thinking you don't have the right answer, doesn't inform my decisions. Humanism is absolutely a great method for determining what you think is right and wrong. That absolutely informs your decisions. We can use science, because I can tell when a person is in pain. I don't want to be in pain. I can empathize with them. And I don't want to be in pain, so I would do my best to avoid causing them pain as well. These are the values that you get from humanism. Atheism doesn't inform values. It simply relates to my response to someone else's supernatural claim.
Yeah, follow-up question?
If morality comes from God, how do you explain slavery?
Like, explain it in general as a historic...
How would that ever be moral?
Well, I think people are sinners. And I think people will work against the moral standards that are true.
I'm talking about the references in the Bible.
Wait, can you give me a specific one? Can you give me a specific one? Because I don't think the Bible wholesale represents slavery. I think it endorses a culture. For instance, I'll give you a book of Philemon, written to...
Ask it, ye shall receive.
Yeah, well, of course. I think the Bible, there's a context that's active in the culture of slavery, which, by the way, wasn't a Christian practice. It was a Roman practice and a Greek practice. And Christianity is...
That it was moral?
I think Christianity assumes it's not moral. I think it's working within a context that they're a marginal, minor group. So when it says, slaves obey your masters, which is probably the text he's going to, it's interesting in that passage. What would be the opposite in that culture? Scott Barchi, UCLA professor of ancient history, who's the leading expert on slavery in the ancient world, says there is no other context other than that culture, because the dominant narrative isn't Christianity. The dominant narrative is the Greco-Roman culture with its understanding of slavery, that Christianity is a small, marginal group when the New Testament's being written, trying to operate and work within that world. And so for me, it's as if me telling you, you don't like America, well, just go blow up the White House and get rid of all the American policies. No person in here has that ability. So what's the question? It's a pragmatic question. How do you work within an evil system of structure? And I think that's what Christianity is addressing. I don't think it's endorsing anything. I think it's working within a structure of culture.
So God didn't have the power to do away with it. He had to put up with it because it was part of it.
No, Christianity my God got crucified. I mean, I serve a weak God. My God's a God who dies for people and suffers, not a God who conquers and kills. And I think for me, what I believe is Jesus Christ is the God who suffers alongside of humanity, who himself became a slave before Pontius Pilate, who himself was spit upon and crucified for our sake. And so for me, God loves the world upside down. He doesn't love it through power over, he loves it through service under, and that's why I'm a Christian.
May I real quick?
Yes,
I'm happy.
Any person in this room could write a superior moral document than the Bible in 5 seconds. You simply add a text that says, do not forcibly copulate, do not own slaves. Boom. That was less than 5 seconds. I just wrote a morally superior book. Can you think of one that would be less moral? I would challenge anyone in the room to think of a less moral document than one that condones slavery in no fewer than 18 passages over and over again. This God, if he exists, supposedly, can be very specific, and he can say, thou shalt not kill. Don't tell me it doesn't say murder, because the book says kill. This God, if he exists, can be very specific and say, thou shalt not steal. He can also be very specific and say, thou shalt not own other human beings against their will. Cut and dry. 1. 2, you told me your God is a weak God, and you're telling your God created the universe? Yes. You can't have it both ways. Have you ever gone bowling? Have you ever gone bowling with somebody, and they say, oh, I'm a best bowler, I'll bowl 240 every single time, and you get there and you're like, really? Cool, I want to see this, right? And they walk up to the lane, and they grab the bumpers, and they throw the bumpers out of the gutter, right? And they're like, watch this, I'm an awesome bowler. They're like, whoa, hold on a second. This person has just lost a lot of credibility to you as a bowler, right? If they're telling you they're a good bowler, you've got to do it within the rules that we understand, we expect, the standards of bowling, right? If you can't bowl gutter balls, if your claim is not falsifiable, you can't be proven wrong, then you don't have a credible claim, okay? If your God can do everything, he really can do nothing, because you can ascribe him any good act and give him the credit, and you can blame anyone else for the bad stuff.
Well, can I just have one comment? I think we have to have a better understanding of how we read the Bible. I think what I hear is a very thin, Dawkins-informed, fundamentalist version of the Bible, which is this idea that every word in the Bible is somehow being endorsed by God. The Apostle Paul, by the way, in this book of Corinthians says, I don't have a word on this. It's not as if God's giving me direct revelation on this. This is just my opinion. And the Bible is not just this, it fell from heaven, unadulterated. It's a God working through humans and history and culture, and there's progressive revelation. And so I think we have to be very cautious to just look at the book monochromatically. It's a library that was written over thousands of years in different contexts, and just assume there's 18 verses in the whole thing. I would say also, too, the Bible's an evil book. It's amazing to me that that's a statement. Okay. Because I would say our very understanding of human beings having universal rights, all people created equal. You cannot argue that apart from a theistic perspective. You cannot. So somebody's a genius and somebody's poor, somebody's rich, not rich. I mean, we are unequal in life. And to have a standard that I'm supposed to buy in just seems like a humanist perspective. We should all treat each other nicely. But there's no objectivity to that. And I think world history has shown that those who are in power see a strong differentiation between those who are not, and don't have an ethical standard of universal human rights. That standard itself comes from a theistic perspective.
If the Bible was written by people, we didn't get our morals from a God.
It's both.
If the Bible was written by a God, then sure, you can say that. If the evidence shows the Bible was written by people, who claim to be inspired by God, our morals did not come from it. They got their morals, they got it from a social structure of the community they lived in, and then they itemize them and categorize them and put them down on paper.
Well, Jean-Paul Sartre said, he said, if you see a woman walking across the street, old woman, and she's pushing her groceries, it makes no difference, Sartre said, whether you get out of your car and you help her across the street, or you run her over with your car. It makes, if Jean-Paul Sartre, atheist, famous, said, there's no difference. For you to assume that there's some difference because, right now your personal empathy assumes there should be some good done to this person, in the overall shape of history, it makes no difference. I mean, even someone like Joseph Stalin said that, right? One death is a tragedy and millions a statistic. Why? Because at the end of the day, the grave covers over all of us. All of us disappear into history. Does anybody in here know their great-great-grandfather's name? Great-great-great? Great-great-great-great? I mean, I doubt there's one person here who knows the genealogy of your family for more than 4 generations. What makes you think your life has any meaning? I mean, your grandkids are gonna forget you completely. So the reality is there has to be a standard above the human fluctuations that we appeal to. And
I'm going to call it right in the interest of time. I'm sorry to see some great questions here. This is another question that we could qualify, we could talk about. We could have a whole debate just on ethics up here, I think, and we should. But there's well, that's for my ethics class. Right? Philosophy,
you got us both.
We'll do a round 2.
Yeah,
round 2.
Bud Life.
There you go. Look at all the love up here. All right, so I want to move on. A couple quick questions here. So, what one word comes to your mind when thinking about the essence of your belief system or religion? Just what one word pops to your mind in defining your religion? Here.
When I read that question, I said I laughed really because the formation of what, for example, the church believes, it took hundreds of years for us to decide what's what, who Jesus was, the history of the church, formation of theology, etc. And it ended up in about the year 350 in something we call the Nicene Creed, what all Christians are to believe. And it's not one word, okay? But if you had to boil it down to one word, I guess, I'd have to say it would be unconditional love, basically. I know that's 2 words.
It's 2 words.
In the Greek, it's 1 word, okay? In English, it's unconditional love, okay?
All right.
Hope.
Hope.
I would say love as well.
Love.
Pragmatic - skepticism.
There you go.
Oh man, we'll talk about pragmatism. They might talk about this.
Did you want to ask a follow-up question? Yes.
No, not a follow-up, but I just wanted to ask a question.
Oh, we'll get to some questions at the end. Okay. I would love to have. Does it relate to ethics or does it relate to one of the topics we've already talked about?
Sort of, yes.
Okay, ask your question.
Oh, okay.
Is that okay, panel? Yeah.
It's just for our Buddhist representative. Listening to everybody talk, what you've said so far, is it fair to call Buddhism non-theistic, or would the term atheistic be better?
Well, like in our particular faith that, like Buddha, for example, that we don't believe him to be like a supernatural being or any different than any one of us here. That we all, and that's why we say that, within our own lives, we have this innate Buddhahood. And it's not to say that that's a particular person. It's just that enlightenment to where we understand the infinite potential within ourselves and the infinite potential within others. And that's what really Buddhahood is. And so that's the enlightenment that Buddha awoken to. And again, there's no difference between us and him. And like, for example, the rebirth or reincarnation, there's no like deity or divine consciousness that kind of creates that. It's all based on cause and effect. How when we come back into the world, how that looks like, how it is. And so in that understanding, then yes, there is no kind of God that we pray to, for example, that when we pray, that we chant, and our chant is Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, which means a devotion to the mystic law of cause and effect through sound. And so it's not, it's really enabling us to awaken to that inner state of life where we have that, where we understand our infinite potential and are able to awaken that in our lives. And so that's what we believe in. So in ourselves and then in others as well.
So let me ask a question here. It's not on here, but it's just related to some thinkers who have influenced you. I think the students would like to know this. I've had several students ask me about this specifically, and that is, could you mention one or two thinkers, religious or otherwise, who most influenced you along your journey, your intellectual or religious journey?
Sure. One of the people that, persons, I guess, that has influenced me is a woman by the name of Edith Stein. Edith was a Jewish. She grew up in a Jewish family, and as she grew, she was an intellectual person, and she ended up becoming a philosopher, a phenomenologist, in the period before World War II, essentially. She was formed by the fact that she experienced World War I and the horrors of that, caring for soldiers as a volunteer nurse during the war. And because of those horrors, she decided that she rejected her Judaism. She rejected the existence of God because she could not see that a God could exist who could allow and accept such horrors, human beings doing to other human beings, and how a God would allow that. And as she progressed in her life, and basically before World War II, she started asking herself questions, and she read a book or two, particular about a particular saint, and she came to realize when she discovered in her studies the cross, she came to realize that the only thing in life that could explain the horrors of World War I, the horrors that the Jewish people had endured over the centuries, was the cross. That the cross was the answer to all human suffering, and it was the cross that Jesus carried. And she went through a process of conversion. She was baptized, but she needed further fulfillment of her call, or vocation, I guess you could say. She became a Carmelite nun. And she wrote books of philosophy. You can go on Amazon and get her books right now. Edith Stein.
I'm writing it down.
Phenomenal.
Plugging her book.
But where it really became the crux of her life was that she was moved to Holland from her Carmel, they call it, where she lived in Germany, because she was of Jewish origin, even though she had converted. They moved her to Holland for her own safety. And right after she was moved there, the Archbishop of that particular area of Holland wrote a letter basically denouncing the Nazis and Hitler for taking over some of the countries in Europe that at that point he had taken over, Poland, etc. And immediately the reaction of the Nazis was to round up everybody of Jewish origin, whether they were Catholic or whatever they were, and put them in a concentration camp, basically, what they called a way station. And there they found her caring for the children, where the mothers of those children were paralyzed with fear. And a group of Catholics came to her and said, listen, we're going to rescue you at a certain time and a certain place. Be ready. And she said, no, do not come for me. My baptism cannot be the basis for my escaping my fate. I need to be with my people. And right after that, she was taken to Auschwitz, and within 24 hours, she was exterminated. So that's a person that lived her faith.
Thank you.
For me, the current president of our international organization is Daisaku Ikeda, and he actually encountered this practice just after World War II in Japan, and that he's actually a very prolific writer. He's a Nobel laureate, and he's received over 300 honorary doctorates from universities around the world, and has had dialogues with pretty much every major leader in the world. And it's really profound that he was able to accomplish so much while young, having suffered so much as well. His family, many of his brothers were killed in World War II, fighting America and the Western. And he actually, as he was young, he had a lot of health problems too. That he had tuberculosis, and back then that was pretty much like a death sentence. And so he was never meant to live past 30, and he's going to be 90 years old soon. And so, through this practice, through his understanding of Buddhism and being able to help other people really be able to change their lives, he was able to overcome that health karma, be able to overcome financial misfortune, and all those different things. And, just a lot of, again, his writings and interactions with people has just been kind of like the modern version of Buddha. Again, we don't worship him. He's a cool guy, But he does inform like a lot of our writings and a lot of our study as well. And so just because of that profound understanding. And everything that he's been able to do, he credits to his mentor, which was Sunitsuburo Makaguchi, who was an educator in Japan around that time. And so really a profound part of our practice is mentor and disciple, that a person being able to follow a good mentor, to learn from them, and then eventually succeed that mentor. And so just kind of a living example of that interaction. And then also, for myself, that I'd probably say Albert Einstein, because, when I went to school, I majored in physics. And so I've always been interested in astrophysics, and, I'm a very, logical, kind of straightforward person. So, and that's why I always talk about the two aspects of the practice, that there's the faith aspect and the logical aspect, because just that's how I am too. And so making sure that everything makes sense, and then the action and reaction, cause and effect, all those types of things make a lot of sense, for how I understood and grew up in the practice.
I hate questions like this. It's like asking which of my kids I love best, or something. It's like the girl.
The nice one.
Before I tell you a couple of things, I would just say, one, read everything. Who cares about the Kardashians? Like, just stop it. Just stop it. Like, you're wasting your life if you're interested in that crap. So I would rather you read any book if it's just a book. So I would say, just be a reader, be critical. I read more non-Christian writings than Christian, because I'm wanting to know my faith is real, and I want to hear every argument against it. And so do that. I know you probably expected this, but I think you should spend a lot of time reading Jesus, the 4 biographies of his life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I think you should see in him not only somebody who's a religious figure, but also a thoughtful thinker, a person who spoke to issues of his day, ethical issues, spiritual, metaphysical, religious. And I think you should spend time with him and read him as a thinker, even if you don't have faith in Christ, if you don't have faith in God. Right? Just read those just as you're an informed person. I don't think you could be an informed person in a Western society without at least knowing things about him. And so I'd encourage you to do that. The second is more of a high, lofty philosopher, but his name's Alistair McIntyre. And he was an atheist Marxist, he wrote books with a guy named Antony Flew, who was an leading atheist until he became a theist right before he died. But Alistair is one of the leading philosophers in the world. His most famous book is called After Virtue. He taught at Harvard, Princeton, Notre Dame, Oxford, Cambridge, just a few small places. And he became a follower of Jesus Christ and a Roman Catholic after reading Thomas Aquinas. And he was an Aristotle scholar, and Aquinas knew a little bit about Aristotle. And so he spent time reading Aquinas and came to be a Catholic. And if you were going to start with one of his books, it's a book on ethics, I would either start with Rivals of Moral Inquiry, or I would start with After Virtue. And it's heavy stuff, but he's one of the most brilliant thinkers, I think, alive today. He's still alive.
I can be quick because I think I've taken more than my fair share of time on a couple of these questions. I've got two names. John Locke, if you're not familiar with Enlightenment history, he's basically the father of a pluralistic secular society. Basically, Thomas Jefferson and all of our founding fathers got almost all of their ideas. They pretty much plagiarized them all from John Locke. So he's a brilliant thinker. The second one I want to talk about is a man named Thomas Fuller. I don't know much about him, but he did say one thing one time which I found very impactful, which is, the truth fears no trial. So if you have accurate ideas, constantly test them against the dictates of reality, okay? And before you open a book, don't decide whether or not it is true or accurately represents the material world. Read it objectively. Don't let your parents tell you, or your pastor, or anybody else, or even me tell you if a book is accurate or inaccurate, right? Start before, because if in basic set theory, I'll do a real quick demonstration here. In basic set theory, if this is everything you can know, okay, and your beliefs are inside of everything you can know, every single time you test your beliefs against the dictates of reality, they're going to end up inside this circle, because that's part of everything they can know. It's accurate, right? However, if your beliefs slide outside of reality, ever so slightly, and you test your beliefs, and you test them 100 times, I could draw 100 dots on this board, right? Eventually, you're going to get some out here. Guess what? This will not bear out when tested against reality, okay? So this is a little bit of set theory's intellectual model to talk about big circles on boards. That's what set theories means. Test your ideas against the dictates of reality objectively. Fair enough?
Very fair. Hey, this has been a lot of fun, and I don't want to end it, but we do. We're just about out of time. I had some other questions planned. I know you all have a lot of questions, and I'm going to presume, I'm going to actually put them on the spot, that they will love to answer your questions after.
We'll provide demonstrations.
That's right. And we do have some literature over here that was brought. Maybe some of the others could refer you to some websites and so forth. I feel like we should end in prayer. No, just kidding.
I'll talk to myself too.
Thank you all. Let's give our panelists a and students, I will see you all.